The Miami Grand Prix was another difficult one for Mercedes, but there's at least some light at the end of the tunnel. It's the last race before a significant upgrade is introduced that team principal Toto Wolff sees as a reset after its struggles since the ground effect regulations were introduced. But while Mercedes is optimistic about what is characterised as its new baseline, its lack of understanding of the reasons for its Miami struggles raise yet more questions about whether it really is on top of its problems. What's more, even if Mercedes has changed its direction to point the right way and its Imola package works, can it really catch up, having lost so much ground over the past year? Things started promisingly for Mercedes and Miami, with George Russell and Lewis Hamilton first and second in FP1. But it quickly descended into the team's worst weekend of the season, starting off with the struggles in the second free practice session Hamilton described as a kick in the guts. On a weekend where everyone struggled to a greater or lesser extent with the low grip track surface and sometimes tricky wind conditions, Mercedes had more troubles on the circuit that starkly exposed many of the vices of the W14. In qualifying, Hamilton was eliminated in Q2, having set the 13th fastest time after struggling thanks to traffic on his outlap. Russell did a little better, but was only just able to scrape through to Q3. He then qualified 6th, 1 second off pole, a position flattered by Charles Leclerc's crash and Max Verstappen's failure to post a time. In terms of deficit to the pace, Mercedes had its biggest gap of the season at just over 1% down. So why was it so bad? Firstly, the Mercedes has struggled with rear instability all season and, on a rear limited track like Miami, that will always be a struggle. It's no coincidence that Mercedes had its strongest weekend at front limited Albert Park in Australia. But there's more to it than that, and that's the concern for Mercedes as it doesn't have a full explanation. That lack of understanding of the car's bizarre fluctuations is part of the problem. Toto Wolff has been critical of the car all season, describing it after qualifying in Miami as neither a nice car nor a good car. But most worryingly, he suggested that the root of the problem is what he called the lack of understanding of the car. So where was Mercedes losing time? Well, the root cause of a car's weakness doesn't always show up in the data of a lap. The first order problem appears to be rear instability in high-speed corners for Mercedes. As Hamilton said, that meant adding more rear wing. This improves the faster corners but makes it harder to rotate the car into the slower corners. Mercedes will have to make different compromises depending on the circuit, and those requiring a wider setup window will inevitably be challenging. The GPS data from Miami showed the biggest time loss was through the slow switchbacks of turn 11 to 16 and then on the ensuing run to turn 17 towards the end of the lap. Visually, the car looks a little lazy on initial turn-in, then stiff and uncompliant over the curbs. A Red Bull looks alive there, a Ferrari beautifully agile. That looks to be the compromise needed to adequately control the rear of the Mercedes through the long, fast kinks of Sector 1. Comparing Russell's best lap to Verstappen's best in qualifying, the Mercedes was 0.3 off the Red Bull when they reached turn 11, much of that lost in the high-speed sweeps. In the ensuing twisty section from turn 11 to 16, and on the subsequent run to turn 17, that stretches to just under 0.9. At the tight turn 11, which begins the sequence, it can be seen from the GPS that although the Red Bull's mid-corner minimum speed is no higher than that of the Mercedes, that minimum is much earlier in the corner for Verstappen, who was able to get on the power earlier simply because the car has rotated immediately. Russell not only has to wait before he can get on the throttle, but in a switchback series of corners such as this, where car placement is crucial, this poor start to the sequence compromises him all the way through. He's later on the gas everywhere as he wrestles with getting the car to change direction. The remainder of this deficit comes from the Red Bull's superior straight line speed, another penalty of Mercedes' higher wing level needed to control the wayward rear. Add to that hints of troubles with the bouncing that plagued Mercedes last year, and it added up to a difficult weekend. In the race, George Russell at least salvaged 4th place with a strong drive, albeit assisted by the Ferrari drivers having tyre troubles. Hamilton took 6th, having started on hards and lost time early in the race stuck in a DRS train. But they were 33 and 51 seconds respectively behind winner Verstappen, showing how much Mercedes needs to improve even to be in the same race as Red Bull. That a distant 4th and 6th place represented a good result for Mercedes in the circumstances shows how far the team has fallen. The question now is whether the imminent upgrades will set Mercedes back on the right path. At the upcoming Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix at Imola, Mercedes will introduce its much anticipated car upgrade. This has been in the pipeline since before the Bahrain Grand Prix. Mercedes has confirmed the upgrade will include a new specification of front suspension, new floor and new side pods. Inevitably, the side pods are a big talking point and have been since Mercedes launched its 2022 car built to the zero side pod concept. Despite evolving that concept this year with fractionally bulkier side pods, it was largely carried over. But then technical director Mike Elliott said during the Bahrain Grand Prix weekend that Mercedes has a different side pod coming, one that requires some changes to parts under the bodywork. Elliott indicated that while these side pods will look a little different to the current specifications, they also won't simply be a copy of the Red Bull concept. That said, Wolff did say in Miami that the side pod design will be more conventional. But the other changes are just as important. The change of the front suspension and the new floor are expected to improve the feel of the car, tackle some of the rear instability, and hopefully allow the car to run a little lower. After all, with ground effect cars, the lower you can run them, the more downforce they produce. Provided, of course, your mechanical platform is able to control it and prevent problems with porpoising and bouncing. Wolff's hope is that this will create a new baseline for the car, and even more importantly, that this will eliminate the question marks and variables that have led to confusion about the performance of the Mercedes W14 so far. Mercedes expects an immediate step forward in terms of performance thanks to improvements in the aerodynamics and behaviour, as well as improved stability because of the gains made with the front suspension changes in terms of platform control. The improvements have proved promising in simulation, but even if they deliver on track as expected, that's just one part of Mercedes solving its problems. If the Imola upgrade delivers as hoped, it's just one step on the pathway. The hope is that this will put Mercedes on the right course with a car that has the development potential to get to Red Bull's level. But there are several big questions. Firstly, Mercedes must get onto an even keel in terms of its understanding of the car. That will validate the direction it has taken and ensure it can make progress over the rest of the year. The long-term ambition is to re-emerge as a title contender, which realistically can't happen until 2024 at the earliest. Then, Mercedes will have the chance to make major changes to the architecture of the car that it cannot make now, thanks to the constraints of the cost cap and the regulations. Wolff's description of this upgrade as a reset is all well and good, but even if it works out and is the ideal direction, Mercedes is still a long way behind. As he said, this is a reset to what would have been a good start 12 months ago. With Red Bull a dominant force and continuing to develop, even with the constraints in terms of wind tunnel and CFD testing imposed by the aerodynamic testing regulations and the team's additional restriction for breaking the cost cap rules in 2021, Mercedes still has a long way to go. By the time Mercedes gets to hit the track next year with a car that incorporates all of the things it wants to change, Red Bull will be 2 years down the road with its understanding and mastery of these rules and its own dominant design. For Mercedes to make up that ground to get even level with Red Bull, given how far behind it is right now, would be exceptional. And even that remarkable recovery requires Mercedes to have a full understanding of its revised car as soon as it hits the track at Imola. If the car runs there and Mercedes is still mystified by its performance, its task might prove to be even more difficult. And potentially, it could mean Mercedes won't be able to catch up until the new regulations kick in for 2026 at the earliest.